Hey, Barry.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
No, a little sleepy, but
Okay, we'll give people a few minutes to sign on. I think we're, all set, and just give people a few more minutes here.
You need this until we.
Okay. If you're ready, Annalisa, I'll go ahead and give a kind of introduction that will also give people a bit more time to sign in. So welcome to our next public lecture. I believe this is the 5th public lecture in the Saas-Fee Summer Institute of Arts public lecture series, co-hosted with the Brooklyn Rail. Saas-Fee, for those of you live from the live audience and YouTube, if you're not already familiar, Saas-Fee Summer Institute of Art is a nomadic summer academy that is interested in the relationship between art and politics. It was founded in Saas-Fee, Switzerland in 2015 by Warren Neidig with co-director Barry Schwabsky. And my name is Sarita Han. I'm the assistant director, and I have been involved with the program since 2018. Our program this year is Deep Ecology in the Cognitive Capitalocene. And we're very excited this morning to be speaking with Annalisa Teachworth. So I'm going to say a little bit about her practice and what she will be talking about today. So Annalisa Teachworth is based between New York and Berlin and is a multidisciplinary artist whose practice includes sculpture, installation, digital media, sound, and painting. Teachworth ties personal experience and allegorical histories into a unique lexicon, focusing on methods addressing the materiality and mythology of displacement. Through an investigation of materials and form, the work examines the relationship between experience and place, the artist's upbringing in the landscape of abandoned post-industrial Detroit, Michigan, and her Puerto Rican ancestry. To describe her practice, research and writing explores collective liminal spaces, contextualizing intersections of disembodiment and vivifying emptiness. Highlighting the agency of ethics used within contemporary technology, Teachworth's examinations switch through myriad formats and historical references as tools for remodeling our relationship to the natural versus artificial. So this is very exciting to have this talk today, building on so many discussions that we've both had in the public lecture series with Tomás Saraceno on Friday, as well as Franco on Monday, Franco Berardi, and yesterday with Victoria Vesna. Her storytelling methods reveal how our technological systems function as a reality machine that defines our intellectual and physical economies, extending beyond our inner selves outwardly into the social fabric. Magnifying tensions with a particular focus on critically reflecting the histories of femininity and post-colonial edict ensues in her intuitive agenda. Teachworth envisions new forms of communication that seek to reclaim and reconstruct her own experiences and the narrative of our collective history itself. Teachworth's works have been exhibited at institutions, including the Shed in New York, Fragile Berlin, MoMA PS1 New York, Hamburger Bahnhof, Stedtisches Museum in Berlin, Kunstwerke Institute for Contemporary Art, and the New Museum in New York, among many others. So today's conversation will explore the growth cycles of various life forms facing fluctuating conditions from the cellular to the human, animal, and planetary bodies. By looking at advanced ways of exchanging and examining progressive novel networks, we query what the collective is working towards as we adapt to increasingly complex social and technological demands. No machine invented can compare to the organized intelligence of nature. The economic system of capitalism mandates constant production and insatiable consumption of goods. The unending need for continual labor reflects a psychological desire to reside in a production and bounty state and an inability to tolerate natural cycles. However, within periods characterized by contradiction and crisis, there is a silver lining for artists and cohorts to have the unique opportunity to envision radical works that coexist with the other, to find change and restore balance. And on that note, please welcome Annalisa Teachworth. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarita. It's very nice to meet you. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and also to the Institute for having me. It's wonderful. I feel really grateful to be in such good company when it comes to this lecture series, and I really appreciate and feel honored to speak. And also for the introduction. So yes, I am an artist, and I am also an activist, working sometimes within an ecological framework, more and more so as time passes. And I hope everyone can hear me, and if there's some background music, I apologize for that in advance. I'm also a representative of the Taino people, who are indigenous to Puerto Rico. They are the native people of the Caribbean. And I am an ancestor of those people and carrying the messages that come from that part of the world. So in this talk, I'm going to be covering some previous works of mine, and also some of my research about future works of mine and where I'm at in that process. I'm going to start by sharing my screen here, and I kind of just talk through some images. Let's see if this comes up. I'm weirdly not seeing what I'm trying to share. It's a bit peculiar. It just worked. Okay. So hopefully everyone can see this.
Yeah,
this is a, yeah, okay. This is a map of the island of Puerto Rico before before colonial times, and this is the state, the provinces of the place as they were named. It is in Spanish, but also the native translation is also there. And I wanted to start with this slide because it's really a geographical point of reference for a lot of the things that I'm going to be speaking about that tie kind of the constellation of many of the things that I'm working on together. But I'm going to continue on. This is a work that I did where I basically adopted a very large billboard over a highway, and I transferred a video of mine onto this highway space. And this video was a video of me basically swimming on a lake. And obviously you can see it's really large. But the work was really trying to speak to the natural environment and how we can blend the natural environment with it more seamlessly into our everyday environment. So I had been driving, seeing this billboard all the time, basically, and just was really curious and interested in what its use case might be outside of advertisements. And after some working, I was able to use this space as a projection or a place in order to sort of subvert the capitalist kind of agenda out of it and have it be just this purely kind of like exhibiting style space. So that was something that I felt very intrigued by, or just the marrying of these two kinds of worlds, like the natural world and also the digital world and also the physical world, and how those worlds collide and what we can do to sort of like rearrange those worlds. So I think I made that in 2017. And I think a lot of the people who drove on the highway were really surprised and intrigued that it was something so different. And sometimes the clouds would sort of be, the clouds in the video or the water in the video would be juxtaposed against the sky, and then also this series of cars running underneath. So that was one sort of investigation of my thoughts around where worlds collide between these topics. And this is a photo of, this is just sort of like a reference to that work where these people were painting their homes in really artistic ways, painting all the walls of their homes and their towns, sort of for like the beautification of the place, but also as sort of like a representation of their ideas or their thoughts, and sort of putting those in public spaces. It's a very interesting idea to me and something that I think about often. And yeah, like I said, that's just sort of like a reference to something that's happening here in this previous work. I often think about places, structures, places of worship, places of praise, home. This is an image from Japan that I didn't take, but it's a reference for an idea that I think about a lot, which is sort of nurturing space and architecture and how people operate within those spaces. This is a photo of a family in Puerto Rico in the 1950s, and the sort of structure that they would live in before it became an industrialized island. So it really became industrialized in the 1930s, in the late 1930s, after the Spanish-American War, and America came and tried to sort of build homes and structures for people to live in. But before that, most of the people who had been living there had been living in structures that were kind of shack-like, I guess I would say, mostly just makeshift structures that were made out of various materials, tin and different kinds of scrap metals and things. And also natural materials like the trees and different kinds of large leaves that are there as well. And from an ecological standpoint, it's really interesting to investigate that kind of architecture to me. I spend a lot of time in Puerto Rico going into libraries and reading about structures and how they were made and different kinds of ties and assemblage of different things. But a lot of these images speak to me because people, in the process of colonialization, people would go there and they would see this sort of living and really look down upon it and see these as really impoverished people because they didn't have running water and they didn't have shoes and they didn't have, sometimes they wouldn't have floors. Sometimes they would just have dirt floors. But it's really mountainous there as well. And so a lot of kind of construction was very difficult. It's also a jungle. It's a tropical rainforest. It's the only tropical rainforest in North America, actually. And it was difficult to manicure that land into being what Americans wanted it to be, which was like kind of a high producing capitalist place. So before that, previous to that development, a lot of the structures looked like this. And after there was a very devastating hurricane in Puerto Rico, like a 0.5 or 0.5 on the scale of how severe it can be. It was obviously, most people know about this, but some people don't. It was the most severe hurricane to ever hit Puerto Rico and one of the largest to hit the Caribbean ever recorded. So there was a considerable amount of change that had to be endured by the people there. And a lot of my family members were included in that. And that means access to resources, fundamental resources such as clean water, electricity, and healthcare. Basically, everything after Hurricane Maria changed the way that people were living and also their ideas around community and culture and how that's structured. And this really deeply affected me because I was spending a lot of time there, and also just fear and sort of grief around the devastation that the people were going through. I had a lot of feelings around it, and I wasn't there at the time that it happened, but I really felt like, moved to do something, but I couldn't really do anything. And at that point, you just kind of become, even if you think you can go there and help, you just kind of become another mouth to feed, or someone who, by existing, your very existence means that you need something. You need to brush your teeth, or you need to use the toilet, or you need to eat food. So it doesn't really even make sense to go there until a certain point in time in order to do the work to help to rebuild things. And infrastructure there was also so complicated even before Maria. So it was really just a challenging situation and almost apocalyptic for many. We're very reliant now on electricity, internet, clean water. Luckily, there is a lot of water there because of the rainforest. There's lots of rivers and there's lots of natural wells, and there's a lot of places to tap into water. So we're very fortunate because some islands in the Caribbean don't have as much access to clean water. So it was a process, an emotional process for me and my family to understand. After that point in time, though, I really started thinking about making work, or I was driven to make work somehow in a different way and think about resources and what they mean and how they operate. And how things move around the world, and artwork in the art world, and what we choose to make, and how that manifests and how that shows up in the world, and how artists are also responsible for like creating a new paradigm, or how we are able to bring forth new ideas that can change understanding for a lot of different people. So this is a work of mine. It's called the Tribute Palette, and it is an architecture formally that is sort of like a home for many ideas. But you can see that there is this sort of scaffolding structure that I created, and then there is sort of this makeshift wall. And that's like a reference to a structure like this. And within this structure, there's a 3-channel projection and a 4-channel sound installation, as well as a sculptural table and a series of vessels that I built. This is the view from the back, but I just felt really driven to kind of create a place or a space for these ideas that I was meditating and ruminating on, and how I could bring some of my thoughts around what was happening and what people were facing in that part of the world to another population. This is a image of the exchange route between Europe and the Americas, and some of the products. Basically, I got very invested in researching the history of certain economic markets and certain food and produce that was, and animals and plants that were being shared across the Atlantic, and how those markets really drove different kinds of populations to move around the globe. And in this piece, the Tribute Palette, the sound that plays is basically it's a score that I composed with a few different voices that speak on these subjects, like certain commodities such as coffee, sugar, pineapples, bananas, and how they really shaped the global trade in the world and changed the way that we think about the economy today. I mean, that was also the part of the continuum of time. Like, I think that as human beings, we always want different things and novel things. But a lot of the agriculture in Puerto Rico was the planting of tobacco and sugarcane, and a lot of my family also worked in the sugarcane fields on plantations. So, and also in tobacco fields as well, and rolling tobacco and things like that. This is the table. This is a table that I built and designed and built, and also I built these vessels, which are made out of sugar, and they're pretty intriguing because they look a bit like glass or plastic or something, but they're actually made of sugar. And they're kind of like urns in a way, I see them, or just vessels that hold a memory of a certain type of labor, or a certain type of human force, or human will, and human I'm looking for a word, like a life's work. So I make these vessels, and in my imagination, or in my vision, they kind of hold these people's efforts. This is a picture of the animations that are my animations that were also projected on within the interior of this architecture. So there's 3 of these animations, and I created these. They're an amalgamation of sort of, I guess they're like sort of spirits or deities or something along those lines. They're like sort of a mix between an animal and a plant and a soul or like a spirit. And they kind of float around in this space and just have sort of strange choreography that perpetuates kind of the narrative around these ideas that I'm discussing. Okay, I think we're going on to the next thing. That was like a bit about my work. And this is a photo of, well, I guess I will first talk about the reading that I sent, which is from a book. I sent a reading and I also sent a video. I think the video is, it's a piece that you listen to. It's like of a whale song. And the reading that I sent was from a book called The Song of the Whale. And I wanted to actually read a little, some other parts of this. So maybe I'm going to stop sharing and read some other quotes from that I liked, that I would like to read now. That's okay. So this book is about, it's generally about the work of Dr. Paul Spong, who I researched, who basically was a doctor working in the field of whales and trying to change or end the commercial whaling industry, which really started to ramp up, and people didn't really understand that these are very sentient creatures, or there was really no advocacy happening for these whales. No one had really taken a strong position, and there was lots of whaling happening in the 1950s. And it wasn't until this specific sort of group of scientists really did the work to change that. And I have just been researching and reading about this work, and I find it very interesting. So I'm going to read this. It wasn't just the ecology movement either, although that was a part of it as well, but the elusive idea around which Paul turned his thoughts and had something to do with the end of human loneliness, the human passage through some great barrier of thought that had kept the human family isolated from the full richness of the life blossoming all around. And this is another quote from that book. This is about another doctor. John Ford had already begun his study of orca vocalizations, and in the first 2 years, he had amassed some interesting data on the existence of dialects among various orca pods in both the southern and northern orca communities. Through the analysis of sound waves, Ford had determined that dialects did, in fact, exist. He noted that pods had unique calls and vocalization formats and unique intonations and accents. And Paul was encouraged so much that he began his comprehensive work centered on freeing the orca. Long before humans existed, the largest sperm whales are, I started at the wrong place. Although the size of, dolphins had a 700 cc brain 30 million years ago, long before humans existed. And the largest sperm whale brains today, this book was written, I'm not actually sure, but in the 80s, I think, or in the 70s. The largest sperm whale's brain today measures 9,000 cc, 6 times the size of a human brain. Although the size of the brain and what can be called intelligent behavior are unquestionably linked, on such a like brain size alone, Dr. Jarrettson pointed out, was certainly no absolute measure of intelligence. The whales, however, were the only animals with a brain psychology compared to that of humans. Dr. Jarrettson pointed out that there are 10 billion neurons in the human cerebral cortex, and that there are 30 billion in the larger whales. We can assume, he told his colleagues, that unusual mental process occurs in whales. So before that time, people really didn't do a lot of, they really didn't have a lot of information on the sounds that whales were making. I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. Then I can talk about these slides. What is this happening? Okay, thank you for your patience. So basically this work of Dr. Paul Fong and a couple of his other colleagues with the whales was really, really relevant in changing the course of history and the way that activism centered around the species of crustacean. Specifically, what I find to be most interesting is that Dr. Spong believed that he could actually telepathically communicate with the whales after working with them. He went in just as sort of a researcher, and he actually ended up figuring out that they were kind of teaching him their language, which was possibly more advanced than the language that he was communicating with them. Basically, the roles reversed, and he started really learning and understanding that these whales were much more intelligent than he was. And he compared basically their captivation and killing and being sold for meat to slavery or like a Holocaust. And that was the first time that someone had ever said something so severe about the killing of whales and dolphins. And he took that to Congress and with other people, and also got a lot of laws changed around the commercial whaling industry, which was, in my opinion, that's a great victory. I mean, I'm not sure we know which way things would have gone if this person's research wasn't so interesting. But these photos are basically from this network called SOSIS, which is an acronym that stands for the Sound Surveillance System, Sonar System. And this was an American military effort to essentially, find out where U-boats were in the war, in the First World War and the Second World War. And they started setting up sonar systems in the oceans to monitor U-boat activity. Basically, they just started listening to the ocean, and they had an incredible amount of information and a lot of sounds of whales, a lot of sounds of these frequencies that were really unusual to them. And I'm not really sure quite who was listening, but they did develop a quite intense library of the sounds of the oceans before we had a lot of the technology that we have today. So I would love the American military to publish that archive online and let people listen to it. But I guess this part of the lecture relates to my work because it's just about listening. I'm very interested in listening to creatures and things like water and air and soil and insects. And I'll get to more about that work later. But basically, also, Dr. Paul Swang's work originated really around the idea that there is really no such thing as an individual whale, that they exist in sort of a oneness. They're just all cells within one larger body of consciousness. And that one whale, there just needs to be one whale within 1,000-mile radius of another whale for that whale to communicate directly through a wave frequency. And these songs of these frequencies were what the military was listening to at that time, which I find to be very interesting and compelling, inspiring work. So I continue to research. And a lot of this also goes back, is about going back and looking in the past into these novel networks and how they are interconnected, and also global for the very first time as well. So now this takes me into my work, which is something that I've been doing for the past 2 years, which is working with bees. I started researching bees around, I guess, the beginning of the pandemic, because life changed a lot for everyone, as we all know, and things slowed down for me as well. And I had always had this passion for bees and related to them in kind of a more profound way, I felt. And I thought it was time to investigate my love for them. So I was offered this residency in the Caribbean, and I decided to basically base my research into studying with bees and working with farmers, different farmers, various farmers, and learning kind of all I could about the science of apiary, which takes a long time. It's like a lifetime of knowledge to understand beekeeping. There's many different ways to beekeep, and there's many different places and people who have different opinions about the best way to do that. And there's also great history on that. So I spent kind of the last 2 years learning about bees and what beekeeping was to different people. And a lot of that involved conversation with different people who were working in culinary, people who had worked on farms, laborers, lots to do with invisible labor and labor that is undocumented. And speaking and listening to those people, and also working in the field, which was really fascinating and incredible to me. And I spent a lot of time absorbing knowledge from people, but I also spent a lot of time absorbing knowledge from the organism as well. And bees are very similar in this way that they are, in one single hive, there can be anywhere between 30 to 50,000 bees at a time. And so when you're in that space, you're really operating in this entire collective where every single organism moves together. They're relating together on an uber collective, just singularity type of way. And they have to be like that because that's sort of the structure of their society, which is also very fascinating to me and gives me a lot of ideas about new ways that we can communicate with, that we can change our own ways in which we operate. They share a total responsibility for one another. They're not, there is no individuality within a beehive. Within a colony, there's one queen who is responsible for laying all of the offspring, that's drones and worker bees, and they are sort of an ultimate symbol of care within their collective for one another and each other. I find this to be a very healthy and sort of unique expression of life, and the beekeepers that I work with also believe so. But it's, for me too, the conversation about working with them, and then also working with artists and having conversations, and also people who work in food, being able to bring all these worlds together is something that I feel very passionate about. So this is a photo from the field of a beehive that moved into a, I don't even know what that thing is, but basically you can just see how many there are when you're out working with them, that they're really surrounding you. And I've taken a lot of sound. I listen to them, and when I'm inside of that space where there's tens of thousands of bees buzzing around me, it's a very different and unique experience too, that most people don't ever get to hear. So I listen to them very, very deeply, and am guided by that. This is an image of a natural bee formation, how the cones actually naturally want to construct themselves, which I think is this very beautiful amorphous shape, really gorgeous, and just has its own style. And when man sort of structures them, we put them into this box, which was created by a certain man who decided, this is the best way to do things. But there's many different ways to set up that structure, and there's many different styles of beekeeping around the world, which I've learned through my research and traveling to different locations and different places, and meeting with the beekeepers there and seeing the different practices that they use to employ these homes and these spaces. So basically, within my artwork, I have been creating for the past 2 years a sculpture, formally a sculpture that's a beehive, that's sort of a structure for home, a sanctuary for bees, and also an artwork, and also a sound installation for that will exist, online, or also in institutions and in indoor places for people to listen to these scores that I'm making based off of the sounds that I've collected from the field. And also in my sculptures, I'm gonna rig microphones into them too, and sometimes have real-time sound of the bee activity. So that is a project that I foresee happening for a long time in my life, and I really appreciate this work. This is a bee that is going into a flower, and it's reminding me of why I put this picture in here. Was I wanted to talk about the subject of love, which essentially I have found to be the driving force of the work of the bees. They kind of go into the sexual part of the flowers of the world, and they remove kind of this material, pollen, from the flowering plants, and they bring it back to the hive, because they have a unique way of expressing love within a hive, as their sexuality is negated to just one individual, but also it is pervasive of the whole hive. It's prevalent in the whole hive. The whole hive is essentially a mechanism of love, and there's the honey is, and other products, the sweetness of the honey and things like that speak to the heart center, and also the Venusian principle that the bees follow. The bees are the creatures of the sun and also the creatures of Venus, and they are driven by the coordinates of the sun. A lot of their flight patterns and a lot of the way that they see and experience life is through recognizing patterns of the sun and how to move throughout that space, because they see infrared. So they see, they don't see the world as we see it. They have a different way of finding what they need to find to exist, which I think is very beautiful. And I'm always constantly inspired by whenever I see bees pollinating in the world. And we also know that this pollination is what gives us food. It's the birth of all flowering plants is the pollination. This is just a picture of, this is just these photos of, like, I don't know, this is a moth lady and this is like a grasshopper guy. I'm also always inspired by things like this, just random things that I see that remind me that everything is alive and everything has kind of a place. And I wish more people could have a more sensitive way of looking at creatures and things. Not really just delegating man at the top of the pyramid, and rather like reverse that pyramid and think about things in a different way. So now I would like to just play some videos of that I made from my work in the field, so that you can see what that kind of looks like when I go out there.
Just so you know, we still see your PDF, so you have to switch screen
I'm switching
sharing.
it.
Yeah.
See that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And enter full screen. Can you see it?
Yep, that looks good.
Cool.
Does this have audio?
No, it's just this is text written.
Okay. I just wanted to check because we didn't hear audio. Thanks.
So, yeah, I am in that space kind of, I guess I like a documentarian, but also a beekeeper now and a foster of that certain expression of life. And there's a great responsibility to do that, for everyone to do that in the world that we exist in today in any way that they can, in the preservation of different life forms. And I can't always express that within my artwork, but I try to do that as much as I can. And I try to use materials that reflect, whenever I can, whenever it's possible, I try to reflect that in the materiality. Like I make paintings with beeswax, and I make sculptures with different materials such as the sugar. Or I'm definitely interested in investigating really kind of alternative, or actually I guess it would be called antiquated ways of producing work that exist outside of the world of plastics and over fabricating and stuff. But I can't really say where my ideas will go right now. I am just really hyper aware of everything that I use within my own process. And I try to keep a closeness to my heart and my feelings when it comes to what I'm creating in the world and how that manifests and how that shows up, and also who it affects. And yeah, who it affects really and who it's for. I think that a lot about that. So I think that's really all that I planned to say today. So we can open it up for questions if anyone has any. And we can also keep it really like informal discussion, because I don't know how many people are in here, but I like it to be really relaxed and just talk about things as well.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, people can feel free to kind of like raise their hands or speak up as we go here. I always know that it takes people a few minutes to kind of gather their thoughts and kind of reflect on what has been said.
Of course.
But I wanted to maybe start out because you began by talking about your practices as an artist and an activist, and I'm always interested to know from people their paths in terms of like, did those things co-develop together? Were you sort of drawn to visual artistic practices and also doing, something more activist work, and at some point they started interrelating, or did one come first? Or like, I'm especially interested to hear like what motivates you to manifest some of your practice in a visual arts context. Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, of course. I think with my practice, they weren't always they weren't always running next to each other. I definitely started as just an artist by inspiration of life. I was always kind of drawing or coming up with ideas, and I was institutionalized in art school from a very young age, and just sort of went through the process of that. And I always felt great social responsibility, but I didn't really put those things together until I would say the last 5 years, when certain things that just didn't sit well, or problems that I felt I was facing with the world, and I didn't really want to be a part of a dialogue within the art world that I couldn't relate to, or that actually just made me feel bad. When it came to the production of objects and things, and I started working digitally online a lot too. to get out of the material realm. And so I make a lot of things like websites and networks and video. I do a lot of video work. I work with a moving image a lot, just because I also wanted to get into a more ephemeral realm. And I think when it came to also socially, like, I wouldn't say that I would just say that the world forced me into that position because I feel sensitive to it.
We have some questions in the chat that I'll read, and of course, if people feel better about writing up their questions, that's great. And then we can also ask them on screen, either way is fine. But Ella says, thank you so much for your talk. So inspired by your work. Would you be able to talk a bit more about your websites and how you relate to the different digital technologies that you use in your work? So I don't know if you want to like share some examples we can look up online, or to talk about how those practices manifest and how you relate to those.
Very good question. Thank you. Yeah, I work digitally online a lot. I also work in a digital collective on a project called Relevance, which I'll share with you guys after. And Relevance is it's a decentralized social network. It's a platform that I built with a partner, and it has to do with the sharing of information. It's kind of a mix between Reddit and Twitter, and you can use it today or whenever you feel like it. It's really interesting. The URL is relevant.community. And I see, I feel on the internet, there is a similarity between even something like my work with the bees, where there can really be like a collective shared space where we all have a lot of autonomy and we all have a way of expressing ourselves that's really unique. I feel very inspired by that. And I have for a long time. And, unfortunately, the internet is policed and complex in not a great way right now. But I also still feel like there's a lot of opportunity, especially when it comes to peer-to-peer networks and how we can share, learn, utilize, use the internet to grow ourselves as a unit in new ways. I don't think that I'm not like on the other end of the spectrum where I think that the internet is like a terrible place where we are just isolating ourselves and it's killing society. And I mean, it is those things, but also it's so many other things. And I grew up, or I was in the position when we were all just experiencing a lot of new things when it came to technology. And I always have just been really inspired by technology and felt really akin to it. Like, I love using technology. I love even like being on a Zoom call. I love being able to connect and talk to people in different parts of the world. I wish it was actually more like I'm into, the future where we do like neurological sort of like implanting in our synapses potentially to communicate with each other without having to use like devices and stuff. So I'm pro technology. Yeah, I would like to see the world, see the future of technology shape itself in the best possible way. And I think that's going to be really challenging. I'm sure everyone knows why, just because of the powers that be and who controls what and their motivations. But also, on the other hand, there are many, many, many more people just like us who have power and control. And I think that this community that I built or like that I co-founded and built with my friends, is an example of that. It's trying to empower people and trying to get people connected to each other and see that they really still have the ability, opportunity, and possibility to be able to be not controlled, not dominated by the Amazons and the Facebooks and even like the Zooms of the market. So we've had our challenges with that too. Like we got really some success and we got some great funding and in the beginning, and then we ran out of that money, and it's been difficult to sort of see it where we want to go, but also you never know. And I think too, it's just important that these things exist, that people still feel like they have the ability to make things that impact and change people, and that even that they still have the ability to do things in general that will make a difference in people's everyday lives. So that was some of my, I guess that's my most important work on the internet. And other than that, I had been living in New York and working commercially as well, creating things, different digital sort of projects and illustrations and things, animations. And like I said, I really enjoy the moving image. I'm super captivated by moments in time and recording those moments, and digital libraries too. Like I said, I would love for the American military to open up that network that they have of the frequencies of the whales, because those are very, very important sounds that they don't really probably even care about, or I don't know, who knows what they think about it, but it's hard to say. But they could really just do a lot that they don't do. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. I just want to second the policing of the internet thing, because it's something I've been working a lot with, not only with the corporatization, but also with laws like FOSTA SESTA that passed in the US. I'm going to put a link for people who are interested to read more about that, because it's a very underknown dynamic within censorship of the internet that's happening. Kristen Cunningham, I'm going to read a couple of questions first from the chat, and then it'll be your turn. The first one is from Kristen. Hi, and thank the other Kristen. Hi, and thank you so much. You mentioned that you always consider who your work is for, and I'm interested in this. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it just sometimes feels when I'm showing work in a gallery, or in an art fair, or in a more private space, that I enjoy that, but I also enjoy my work to be seen by many, many more people in many different places. And I think that's also part of my work on the internet, is that I'm interested in working outside of those traditional spaces and having my ideas shown to people who aren't really a part of that dialogue, or aren't really exposed to those facets of life, because it seems like a really small piece of the puzzle in my mind. And just also from my experience and where I'm from, I wasn't really raised in an art, I wasn't exposed to art in the art world way that I am now until I moved to New York, really. And so I feel very privileged to be able to do it all, but I am also trying to speak to an audience that is broad and maybe even outside of the art world. So I answered that question as best as I could, but yeah.
Next, we have a question from Barry. Annalisa, I realized that you were born in the US mainland and not Puerto Rico, but I wonder if there are particular Puerto Rican artists whose work you feel particularly close to.
Not really. When it comes to people who I'm inspired by, I'm really inspired by my peers and my friends, and also the people that I meet, like the farmers that I work with. I've worked on a few different continents on farms now, and the generosity of people that I have encountered when it comes to learning about things, and how supportive people can be when it comes to sharing knowledge is really what I feel most inspired by. So in Puerto Rico, there's a few farmers that I keep in touch with, and then I go visit and I talk to, and I'm so inspired by their labor and the people that I've been able to meet through my own work, pretty much.
Hey, Kristen, would you like to ask for a comment? Cunningham?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your beautiful work, your talk, and your attention to materials. I really appreciate that and resonate with that. And I was wondering, you were talking about your research with the bees and the whales and their interconnectedness and ability to communicate in different ways, and like telepathically and through sound, through across distances that seem very far, and your work with the internet. And this idea of, you've probably heard of it, that we're all one, we're all the same body, we're all the same person, which seems, kind of audacious if you think about it from the perspective of capitalism, which seems to be the word that everyone's using to umbrella all of the nasty things that we don't like about our world. And I was just thinking, like, and we see it as kind of like a blight or something, or like gone crazy. It's like an illness or something that's happening. And I'm just wondering, like, in your research with bees, and I know it's new, and the whales, which I hope that the US Army is listening and that they will open up that research, because I'm sure there's many people there who also want to make the world a better place with more love and understanding. But I was wondering, like, how in your research, how the other animals deal, or if you've noticed how they deal with a problem or a blight, or something that is, we're trying to address this problem with our work and our thoughts and our actions. And I'm just wondering, like, and if anyone has like figured out like how, I'm also interested in your internet concept and its connection to all of us. But back to, like, how do other animals deal with these, illnesses? If you have a thought on that, or a projection, I don't know, or a fantasy.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. I think that solutions are always among us, and that basically I am a person who likes to focus on problem solving versus sort of, especially when it comes to like an ecological dialogue. There's a lot of negatives that we can say about what's happening and humans, and also our responsibility, and pollution and the things that we do, and all of the problems. But yeah, when it comes to these solutions, where are they and what are they? And I guess that is the center of why I study these other representations is because I think there is knowledge to be gained there. I can't specifically say when something is disease that there's one, there's many ways to sort of fix a virus or disease. You know, there's a lot of roads to Rome. And as a human population, right, we experience that with collectively sort of experiencing something like COVID and how we handle that and how we get through that together. So, yeah, I don't necessarily know that there would be like, you know, one great example that I could give of like a bee colony doing a certain thing to fight off a disease. You know, they all have their own individual unique ways of combating problems within their structure, and that those problems are very interesting and like various and unique too. But it's definitely easier for them when they operate together than when they operate as in super hyper individualists, which is like what capitalism projects, or what we see an effect of capitalism sort of rippling through our psyche and our ways of being together, or basically separating each other from each other and separating our goals and our desires from a collective goal and desire, which the whales and the bees kind of share, and dolphins too, and I think fish and many other things, octopus. You know, we have that perspective that we are, like I said, on the top of this pyramid, and we're just not. Like, we are not what we think we are, but we have a very interesting mind that has been contorted in so many different ways and lost a lot of information from people who've existed before. And I work to try to get that information back from those people directly too. I have a lot of conversations with elders in the Native communities, and I am not afraid to speak to those people about their experience in the past and the things that they know, and kind of try to bring that to the forefront as well. That's like a part of my work.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
I'm going to read Amelia Frank's question, and then Amelia Saul, you'll be next. Amelia Frank says, thank you for your talk. My question is about whaling. There are some cultures in which practices like whaling or the killing or eating of other animals, which Westerners consider intelligent or sacred, which was investigated yesterday's morning's presentation. So we're talking about, you know, horses, dogs, cats, things like this, have a deep history and cultural significance. But I do agree that the context of modernization may have changed the nature of these practices. When is it appropriate to disentangle cultural practices from their local significance in order to critique them, which kind of builds on what you were just starting to talk about?
Yeah, I think that preserving culture is always of an utmost importance to whatever you might be doing. It's hard to differentiate between a practice that is considered wrong to some and right to others, right? That's kind of like an ethnographic problem as well, where we come in and place a judgment on someone, something else, or on a practice that another culture is doing, and kind of deem it wrong and say that they should not be allowed to do that. But it does definitely change when it comes to the eradication of a species, which is where the whaling industry was going. And I mean, there's a lot of things that have been damaged on this earth to the point of no return, unfortunately, already. So we have to prevent that from happening. But I do know also about those cultures and their whaling practices, and I know that they're sacred and have the utmost respect for their community and their practices, and also what they need to do to sustain their life, which is ultimately what that is about. It's about feeding themselves. So I think that generally animals surrender their lives a lot of the time for humans to sustain themselves. And that's like a whole other conversation, like vegetarian and veganism and these practices. But, you know, for me personally, I think that there's definitely shades of doing things that, I mean, the commercial farming and fishing industry is really, it's just stacked. It's such a loaded conversation. So, you know, every conversation today is a loaded conversation.
Yeah, we've been talking a little bit about that differentiation between subsistent farming and industrialized farming, which is an important distinction.
There's a lot of industrialized farming in beekeeping as well, which is really intense.
Yeah. Amelia.
Thank you so much for such a beautiful presence through the internet. It's I'm not in general comfortable around Zoom meetings, and somehow I was today, and so appreciate that. I wanted to ask a much more formal question. You said something about scores from recordings and your like compositions or scores. And so I was really curious about how you work through that. And then I also, so I don't have to jump back on, I just want to tell you, I have a beekeeper for you around Florence, if you want one. Okay.
Oh, thank you. I'm in Italy right now. Did you know that?
Oh, you are? No,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. But I have, he's amazing. He's like a total disillusioned, super political guy who decided to work with bees instead of still trying to protest, like, you know, Italian, like lack of national sovereignty and stuff like that. And he's incredible. Like, so let me know. I'll send you his number. He's very sweet.
Of course, yeah. I'm more than happy to be connected with anybody who works in any of the things that I'm talking about. I love having conversations with people, and I love sort of just sending the positive vibes over the internet. So thank you, I understand. With the scores, I am interested in music, and I study music, and I like in my piece, The Tribute Palette, there's a score in that's about 20 minutes long, and that's showing in New York City right now. You can go listen to it if anyone happens to be actually there.
Where is it? Oh, sorry, where is it?
It's at Company Gallery in Soho. And yeah, I love to deeply listen to sounds, and I work on those scores, and I basically manipulate them. Like with the bee sounds, I essentially kind of change the frequencies to mirror certain things that I'm interested in, durations of time, numbers, and things like that, like the average human lifespan, or certain time signatures that I'm interested in, really kind of metaphysical and far out. And, yeah. So I'm making this installation to the future where, you know, essentially these sculptures that are the beehives would be existing somewhere. Let's say if they were at a museum, they could exist elsewhere, and then people would also be able to go and listen to these scores that I'm making, that I work on, and also listen to the sounds of the bees in the real time. Is like it's changed my whole life. I mean, I don't have words to describe the way that sounds. So, and I think most beekeepers, they're so in tune with their girls that they really understand that too. So yeah.
Great. David?
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. My mother-in-law lives in Durham and North Carolina, and she's participated in a bee, like she has a hive that gets maintained in her backyard, and it's like part of this community thing. And just from talking to her, I've learned about all these ways in which like bees have to be maintained by people in order to keep them going. Like they get mites on them and have to be kind of like shaken down to remove mites. And I guess I was just wondering about, we were talking about animals being able to solve problems, but we're also in this kind of stage where we've made so many problems for them that in some ways humans have to like solve problems to keep animals alive, I guess. I was just wondering what your thoughts on that are, that kind of predicament.
I'll speak to that for sure. I think that in my research around dealing with different beekeepers around the world, they all have their own way of doing things, and bees, they don't have to be, they will exist. They don't exist like coincidentally with humanity at all. We collect them and put them into a certain shape, and that shape sort of designates what happens to them. So those mites or different diseases come because of the form that we put them in. And the more far away they get from the human touch, the better that they are, actually. So it's totally this thing where we are always doing that to different species and populations, right? We are always kind of taking them and putting them in these places and spaces and cages and forcing them to do these things and eat these things, and then they get diseased, and then we get diseased, and we have that kind of relationship with them, which is sort of like a infinity loop of like just humans versus like everything, right? It's a very toxic and troubling experience, and that was something that I learned too, because I was studying all this and doing all this research about the diseases and why they happen and how they're preventable. And then I went to other places, and those diseases just don't exist because the parameters that we are putting on them are totally different. Like in the commercial bee industry, the problems are stacked, and it's just because they're doing it on this scale, and they're moving the bees across country. And the bees are dying because they're in these trucks, and they're going from California to like Montana, and they're pollinating. We're doing these really weird things, and so weird things happen. And I think that happens for us too in many other relationships, right? Where we put these chickens or these cows or whatever, we're feeding them like plastic. It's like, it's so weird. And then there's this weird outcome, and we were like, why? Yeah, so I guess I learned really by experiencing how many different people do things, that some problems only exist for some people based on the parameters that they have put on, or the conditions that they're working in, and that the world is a very subjective place. Very. That's why it's so important to experience other people's cultures and not also make judgments on what they do as well.
We have just a few minutes left here if anybody has any last questions or comments. One of the things that struck out for me with one of the videos that you showed was about this dynamic with the bees around exhaustion. It was just a very quick thing about kind of distributing labor. And I was thinking a lot about our talk on Monday with Franco Berardi around the role of depression. And we talked about the kind of like great resignation and, people's kind of general exhaustion in the face of the complexity of the world and the chaos that we're experiencing at the moment. And I just wanted to know if you have any further thoughts building on that moment in the video about this relationship between exhaustion and labor that we maybe can learn from bees, or that you've experienced yourself in the process of making this work.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, I don't know how to jump in properly. I'm sorry.
Jump in. That's okay.
I just asked a question, but if you want to
I thought I would. I heard your question, and I thought I would just jump in on it. Your work looks great. I
Thank
saw I was very struck by the pictures of the hives formed on the ceiling. Can you speak, in responding to Sarita's question, can you speak a little bit more on those and what the background of that image was? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to speak to your question first. Those hives are basically the way that, the natural way that the comb forms when they're outside of the structure of the bee box, which is what most beehives look like. They look like a series set of stacked boxes, which I'm sure you've seen. But sometimes a natural hive occurs in different places, and that's what that looks like. They have no box to fill, so they make their own shapes, and those shapes are very organic. They're not a square. They're often circular or wavy, and they often exist in spaces that are like cavernous or held or home-like. And so we have this certain standard that we use that's really actually different from their natural formation of how they look. And I am interested in keeping things as most close to natural as they can be. So there's also a certain type of beekeeping that happens a lot in Africa that's basically like an upside down triangle. That's more the shape. The hive is like a long upside down triangle, and they work top down. But yeah,
Was that your work then, or was that an example of that?
Oh no, that's not. Yeah, that was just an example of
okay, yeah.
An example of the shape that they make out in the wild. Or in that case, it wasn't a wild. I think it was like, I can't really remember where that image was from, but it's just like an observation of sort of like what a natural cone would form like. And I know Pierre Huyghe has this very famous piece too, where he did this sculpture, it was like a traditional, like Roman type sculpture, and then he had this beehive formed over the head of the sculpture, and it had this like natural waveform. It's a very beautiful piece. There's a lot of artists that like work with bees, and I'm inspired by them, and also in conversation with them. Terrence Poe is a good friend of mine who also works in building these sort of Middle Eastern type of beehives that are made out of mud, and they're enclosed, and he's built those in galleries and stuff, and they're very cool, and you can't see any of the insides. They sort of look like mud ovens, but actually the entirety is a beehive. So yeah. And then back to your question, I would say that labor is very important to me because my family comes from, as I mentioned, my ancestry is a diverse nature, but a lot of my sort of one generation away family was working on plantations, not as slaves, but 2 generations prior to that, we would have been close to a format of that, and working on a sugarcane plantation in Puerto Rico in the earlier part of the last century, was really violent and intense, and shaped a lot of the trauma that we experienced, and that affects me. It has a great effect on me, and it's just a close tie. So when I think about labor, I come from that perspective or that place, which is not unique in the world, but it's definitely not also talked about often, or it's not also considered or made a point of, because those people didn't really have the education or the privilege or the lifespan to speak about that type of labor. So I'm not really sure if that answered your question. But when it comes to labor and work and the nature of work, I think about the past and my own family a lot.
Yeah, I was just asking in relation to the video moment with the bees, where you were kind of connecting that with exhaustion and this kind of strategy, or the structure that the bees were using as distributing labor, which I thought was really super interesting to think about. Anyway,
Yeah, they have a really, really wonderful way of making sure everyone gets what they need.
Great. Well, that's actually our time. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. This was super fantastic and certainly built on many of the discussions that we had yesterday as well. So that was also just, fantastic to add your work to the larger discussion, as well as to hear about your specific practice. So thank you everyone for joining us online. We'll be back tomorrow with Florencia, Portocarrero, and Eliana, Otta. And for the rest of the people here in New York, we will be back this afternoon with Bruce Wexler and Warren Neidick. So thank you, Annalisa.
Thank you all so much for staying with me and hearing about my ideas. And hopefully, if you have anything that you also think of me, please get my email and reach out to me. I'm down to talk anytime about anything. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Annalisa.
Bye.
Bye.